There was a time in my life when the idea of joy felt distant. I remember waking up and already feeling heavy. Nothing dramatic had to happen. There was just a quiet weight, a kind of emotional fog that followed me through the day. I tried to distract myself. I tried to fix things in the outer world. I told myself that once certain problems were solved, then I would feel better. But that day never seemed to come, because every time one problem faded, another appeared, and so I remained in a cycle of waiting for life to give me permission to feel okay. It was during that time that I began to understand something deeper. Joy is not something the world hands to you. Joy is a state of consciousness. At first I resisted this idea. How could I feel joy when I didn't feel joyful? How could I pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't? But then I realized something very simple. I was already practicing imagination every day. Just in the wrong direction. I imagined what could go wrong. I replayed things that hurt me. I anticipated disappointment. Without realizing it, I was living in a state of sadness, not because life forced me there, but because I was continuing to return to it within my own mind. And so I asked myself a new question. What would happen if I chose a different state, even just for a moment? Not because I felt like it, but because I understood that the state I occupy shapes the life I experience. That was the beginning. Not a sudden transformation, but a quiet decision. I began in a very simple way. I stopped trying to force happiness. Instead, I allowed myself to sit quietly and imagine something gentle. Not something unrealistic, not something overwhelming. Just a moment of ease. I would close my eyes and imagine myself smiling softly, feeling light, as though something had shifted in my life. I didn't ask how or why. I didn't try to explain it. I simply allowed myself to feel what it would be like if just for a moment everything felt okay. At first the feeling was faint. My mind would interrupt. It would say, "This isn't real." It would remind me of everything that still felt wrong. But I did not argue with those thoughts. I simply returned to the feeling, again and again. You see, the mistake many people make is believing they must eliminate sadness before they can feel joy. But that is not how it works. You do not wait for the state to change. You enter the state and the change follows. So I practiced this gently throughout the day. When I noticed myself sinking into heaviness, I paused, I took a breath, and I asked myself, what would I feel right now if I were okay? Not perfect, not ecstatic, just okay. And I allowed that feeling to exist, even if only for a few seconds. Those small moments began to grow. I noticed that I was not as reactive. Things that once overwhelmed me began to lose their intensity. I wasn't forcing joy, I was returning to it. And slowly it became more natural. There came a moment when I realized something had truly changed. It wasn't that my life had suddenly become perfect. It was that I no longer needed it to be. I had discovered that joy was not dependent on circumstances. It was something I could access within myself at any time. The outer world still had its ups and downs. There were still challenges, still uncertainties, but I was no longer defined by them. Because I had learned to return to a different state. I had learned to choose joy, even in small, quiet ways. And as I continued to live from that state, something remarkable began to happen. Life started to feel lighter. Moments of ease appeared more often. People responded to me differently. Opportunities seemed to arrive at the right time. It was as though the world itself was beginning to reflect the inner shift I had made. And then I understood the deeper truth. Joy is not something you find. Joy is something you allow. It is something you accept as your state, regardless of what appears in the moment. So if you find yourself feeling sad, or overwhelmed, or simply not like yourself, I want you to remember this. You are not required to wait for life to change before you feel better. You are not required to solve every problem before you allow yourself peace. You can begin right now, not by forcing happiness, but by gently choosing a new state. Close your eyes, take a breath, and ask yourself, what would it feel like if just for this moment everything was okay? Feel that, even if it's small, even if it's brief. Return to it again and again, for the state you return to most often becomes the life you experience. And as you persist in that quiet choice, you may one day realize something beautiful. The joy you were searching for in the world was always waiting for you within.